Most people operate under the illusion that the end of a marriage sounds like a natural disaster, a hurricane of shattered plates, the dull, concussive thud of a slamming door, or the hysterical, gasping weeping of two people who have forgotten the language of love. But for Elias Vance, the end of his marriage did not sound like a war. It sounded like the soft, metallic click of a brass key turning in a lock at exactly 2:14 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday, accompanied only by the low-frequency hum of a commercial HVAC system in the corridor of an upscale hotel. Elias was a man who found comfort in structure, a senior structural engineer for Halloway & Graves, a respected mid-sized firm in downtown Seattle, where his existence was governed by the immutable laws of physics, load-bearing capacities, tensile strength, shear force, and the absolute certainty of mathematics. He earned a base salary of $148,000 a year, supplemented by a performance bonus that usually netted another $22,000, and he drove a 2021 Volvo XC60, safe, reliable, understated in denim blue metallic, not because he lacked imagination, but because he was the kind of man who checked the tire pressure on his wife's Audi Q5 every Sunday morning while she was still asleep. His wife, Julianne, was the aesthetic counterweight to his functional stoicism, a freelance event coordinator specializing in boutique weddings and high-end corporate retreats. She was vibrant, chaotic in a charmingly curated way, and effortlessly beautiful at 38. They had been married for 9 years, a duration that felt substantial, a decade of shared taxes, a joint checking account at Chase Bank, and a mortgage on a 4-bedroom Craftsman in Queen Anne that cost them $4,800 a month. With their 10th anniversary approaching on November 14th, Elias believed their history was as solid as the reinforced concrete foundations he poured for high-rises, never suspecting that concrete, if the mixture is impure, will eventually crack under pressure. The fissure revealed itself on October 2nd, a day that began with the mundane gray rain typical of the Pacific Northwest, streaking against the glass of his 14th-floor office. Elias had been planning the anniversary surprise for 6 months, a meticulous project designed to answer Julianne's frequent complaints that the city was suffocating her creativity and that she craved the silence of the ocean. He had quietly, without alerting her, liquidated a significant portion of his pre-marriage inheritance, a conservative investment portfolio worth roughly $85,000, to secure a down payment on a small, secluded A-frame cabin on the edge of the Olympic Peninsula. It wasn't a rental, it was a purchase, a permanent retreat where he intended to hand her the deed over a candlelight dinner and say, "This is ours, forever." However, the machinery of his plan jammed when the bank, Pacific Northwest Credit, flagged a discrepancy in their debt-to-income ratio during the final underwriting process. When Elias called the loan officer, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, whose voice trembled slightly with professional hesitation, she informed him of an undisclosed liability, a secondary residential lease. Elias, adjusting his rimless glasses, initially assumed it was a mistake, or perhaps a guarantor's signature for a client, but Sarah corrected him with data. It was a luxury lease for a corporate apartment in Bellevue, opened 4 months ago, costing $3,100 a month. Elias stopped breathing. Bellevue was a 20-minute drive across Lake Washington. Julianne had no clients there, no family there, and certainly no reason to rent a high-end unit at the Highline Towers. A rational man would have picked up the phone and demanded an explanation, but Elias possessed a primal, lizard-brain instinct, the instinct of an engineer hearing a groan in a supporting beam. That told him if he asked, she would lie, and if she lied, he would lose the advantage. Instead, he logged into her business account using an old password she hadn't changed, July wedding 2014, and watched the screen populate with the financial architecture of her betrayal. There were the transfers to Bellevue Skyline Properties, but worse were the lifestyle charges. Room service at the W Hotel on a Tuesday, when she said she was working late, a $450 spa package at the Fairmont Olympic when she was supposedly visiting her mother, and a sickening $600 charge at Men's Warehouse on September 18th. Elias bought his suits bespoke. He had never stepped foot in a Men's Warehouse in his life. Instead of eating the turkey sandwich he had packed for lunch, Elias put on his beige trench coat and drove across the 520 floating bridge, the windshield wipers of his Volvo slapping back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm that matched the pounding of his heart. He parked 2 blocks away from the Highline Towers, in a public garage next to a cheesecake factory to ensure his car wouldn't be spotted, then walked through the rain to the lobby at 1044 NE 4th Street. He bluffed his way past the concierge with the effortless confidence of a man who belonged in expensive spaces, claiming he wanted to surprise his wife with lunch, but had forgotten his key fob. The elevator ride to the 14th floor was a silent ascent into hell, and when the doors opened, Elias positioned himself in the alcove of the emergency exit stairwell, a vantage point that offered a view of Unit 1402 through a small wire glass window. He waited there for 45 minutes. His legs burned, the smell of dust and concrete filled his nose, but he remained as still as a statue. At 2:38 p.m., the door finally opened. Julianne stepped out. She was wearing a silk robe Elias had bought her for her birthday 2 years ago, her hair messy and wild in a way it never was when she was with him, her face flushed with a raw, unfiltered happiness that twisted a knife in Elias's gut. Following her out was a man who leaned against the doorframe with the casual arrogance of ownership, wearing nothing but boxer briefs and a t-shirt. Elias felt the bile rise in his throat as he recognized him instantly. Ryan Corbett. Ryan was Elias's junior associate, a 32-year-old man Elias had mentored for 3 years, advocated for during promotion cycles, and hosted at his own dinner table just 3 weeks prior. He watched as Ryan ran a hand through Julianne's hair and heard him say, "Don't be late tonight. He's going to be boring about the budget again, isn't he?" He watched his wife laugh, a cruel light sound, and reply, "He's always boring about the budget, Ryan. That's why I have you." Elias didn't burst through the door. He didn't scream. He turned around, walked down 14 flights of stairs to burn off the adrenaline, and drove back to his office to work until 6 p.m., realizing with a cold, terrifying clarity that his marriage was a condemned building, and you do not live in a condemned building. You demolish it. For the next 5 weeks, Elias Vance became a spy in his own life, entering the most excruciating phase of the betrayal. The double life. This is the part of the story that breaks most men. The requirement to sleep next to the enemy, to feel their warmth in the bed, to hear their rhythmic breathing, and to know that hours earlier they were whispering secrets to someone else. Elias treated this torture like a project demolition. On October 5th, while Julianne was in the shower, he installed a passive background logger on her phone and a keystroke logger on her home desktop. He stopped sleeping through the night. Instead, he would wait until Julianne drifted off around 11 p.m., then slip out of bed to his study to analyze the data. He pulled the credit reports and found 3 credit cards he didn't know about, maxed out to the tune of $45,000. He found a forged signature on a 401k hardship withdrawal request from 6 months ago, where she had taken out $60,000 citing a medical emergency. The digital dragnet revealed where the money was going. Ryan Corbett had a gambling problem, online poker and sports betting. And Julianne wasn't just sleeping with him. She was bankrolling his losses with Elias's life savings. The most critical piece of intelligence came on the night of October 20th, when Elias read a text message exchange mirrored from her phone. Ryan had asked for another $2,000 for a bookie, and Julianne had replied, "I can't take more from the joint account this week. Elias is watching the monthly. Soon. Once the anniversary happens, I'll ask for the separation. I just need to secure the alimony strategy." Elias stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in his glasses. She was waiting for November 14th. In Washington state, a marriage of 10 years or more is often considered a long-term marriage, which significantly changes the court's view on spousal support, potentially granting her maintenance for life. She was running out the clock. She was staying for the tenure. Elias closed his laptop, a cold smile touching his lips for the first time in weeks, and whispered to the silence, "You want to make it to the anniversary? Okay, let's make it to the anniversary." Elias contacted a forensic accountant and a shark of a divorce attorney named Marcus Reed, instructing them to prepare a case that was not merely a dissolution of marriage, but a prosecution of fraud. "I need to protect what's left," Elias told Reed, "and I need to make sure she gets nothing. Not just nothing, I want her to owe me." While Reed built the financial case, Elias built a professional one. He had to see Ryan every day at the office, had to review Ryan's structural drawings, had to listen to Ryan brag in the break room about dating an older woman who pays for everything. Elias would stand by the coffee machine stirring his black coffee and say with a double meaning that flew right over Ryan's head, "Make sure your foundation is solid, Ryan. High maintenance usually means structural instability." Quietly, Elias documented every error Ryan made: lazy calculations, corners cut on safety inspections for a condo project in Capitol Hill, and compiled a dossier for the Washington State Licensing Board for professional engineers. The days ticked down with agonizing slowness. Julianne bought a new red velvet dress for the anniversary costing $800 and gushed about how excited she was for their milestone. Elias played his part perfectly, nodding and agreeing, while inside he was counting the hours until the trap would snap shut. November 14th arrived, bringing with it a crisp, cold evening. The trap was set at the Chrysalis, a waterfront restaurant in Bellingham, where Julianne had insisted on hosting a dinner party for 20 of their closest friends and family. She looked stunning in her red dress, gripping Elias's arm and playing the role of the devoted wife, squeezing his hand affectionately whenever someone made a toast. "To Elias and Julianne," their friend Mark shouted, raising a glass of champagne. 10 years of weathering the storm." Elias raised his glass and drank, his pulse steady. Ryan Corbett was not there. He wasn't invited. But the GPS tracker showed Julianne had stopped at the Bellevue apartment on her way to the dinner. At 8:00 p.m., after the sea bass and filet mignon had been cleared, Julianne stood up to give a speech. She teared up, talking about Elias's kindness and stability, lying with a fluency that was almost artistic. "Elias is my rock," she said, looking deep into his eyes. "I don't know where I'd be without him." The room applauded. Then Elias stood up. He adjusted his jacket, looked around at her parents who were beaming at him, and pulled a remote control from his pocket. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice projecting easily to the back of the room. 10 years is a long time. In engineering terms, a decade is enough time to test the structural integrity of any build. You find out where the stress fractures are. You find out what can hold weight and what collapses. He pointed the remote at the large screen behind him. The guests expected a montage of vacation photos. Instead, the screen flickered to life with a high-resolution image of a bank statement, the line item Bellevue Skyline Properties, highlighted in aggressive red. A confused murmur rippled through the room. "Elias?" Julianne whispered, her smile faltering. "What is that?" Elias didn't look at her. He looked at the guests. "This is the lease for the apartment in Bellevue, Unit 14-2, paid for with funds from our joint account." He clicked the remote again. The next image was the photo from the hallway camera. Julianne in her robe, Ryan Corbett leaning against the doorframe, his hand possessing her waist. A gasp sucked the air out of the room. Julianne's mother covered her mouth with a trembling hand. Julianne stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. "Elias, stop! Stop this right now!" But Elias was relentless. "Sit down, Julianne. I paid for the dinner. I'm going to finish the speech." He clicked again, revealing the text messages about the alimony strategy and the boring husband. "You wanted to wait for the 10-year mark," Elias said, his voice devoid of emotion. "To secure lifetime alimony. That was the strategy. Strategic patience. But you made a miscalculation." He looked at his watch. "At 5 p.m. today, my attorney filed for divorce. That was 3 hours before our 10th anniversary officially clocked in on the court record. We haven't been married for 10 years, Julianne. We were married for 9 years and 364 days." The silence in the room was absolute, heavier than any physical weight. Elias clicked the remote one last time, showing a PDF of the lawsuit filing and the report to the state licensing board regarding Ryan. I also took the liberty of forwarding the evidence of the 401k forgery to the district attorney this afternoon. There is no lake house, Julianne. There is no cabin. There is only this. He reached into his inner pocket, pulled out a single white envelope, and slid it across the white tablecloth toward her. You've been served. He turned to the stunned guests, who sat frozen with their forks halfway to their mouths. I apologize for the discomfort. Please enjoy the dessert. It's excellent. I've already settled the bill. Elias Vance turned around and walked out of the private room, the sound of his footsteps steady on the hardwood floor. Behind him, the silence broke into chaos. He heard Julianne's mother sobbing and Julianne screaming his name, a desperate, shrieking sound that meant nothing to him anymore. He walked out into the cool, crisp night air of Bellingham, got into his Volvo, and sat there for a moment. His heart rate was 72 beats per minute. He started the engine and drove away, leaving the rubble of his old life in the rearview mirror. The aftermath was nuclear, a total demolition. Because Elias had filed before the 10-year mark and possessed irrefutable proof of marital waste, spending community assets on an extramarital affair, the judge was merciless. Julianne didn't get alimony. She got debt. She was held liable for half of the dissipated assets and ordered to repay the stolen 401k funds. With no liquid cash, she was forced to sell her jewelry, her car, and her share of the equity in the Queen Anne house. The house was sold, and Elias took his share to finally buy the cabin on the Olympic Peninsula, the one he had originally planned for us, now just for him. The criminal charges for forgery were pleaded down to a misdemeanor, but the reputational damage was fatal. In the high-trust world of corporate event planning, no one hires a fraudster, and her business collapsed within 6 months. Ryan Corbett fared no better. Elias's report to the licensing board resulted in the suspension of his engineering license pending a full investigation into his negligence. Fired from Halloway and Graves for gross misconduct, and without Julianne's money to fund his gambling addiction, Ryan quickly abandoned her for a new target. 6 months later, Elias sat on the cedar deck of his A-frame cabin, the air smelling of pine needles and salt spray. The sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. He held a glass of Macallan 18 in his hand. He was alone. He wasn't happy in the giddy, euphoric way Julianne had tried to fake, but he was whole. He had torn his life down to the studs and built something new. He took a sip of the scotch, feeling the burn settle warmly in his chest, and listened to the waves crashing against the shore, finally understanding that sometimes the quietest surprises are the ones that save your life.